They've been taught to deal with the feeling instead of understanding the mechanism that created the feeling. You don't calm the mind by fighting it. You take control by changing what the mind is doing. Hey there, I'm Rob, creator of the Mindshift method. And these podcasts are where we start to break the cognitive patterns that keep you stuck. Most people have been taught the same thing when it comes to how they feel. Calm down, relax, take a breath, think positive. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But if you've ever actually tried to do that in the middle of stress, anxiety, middle of frustration, or when you're angry, you already know something. It doesn't work really well, not properly, not consistently. Because in that moment when your mind is racing, when your body is switched on, when something has triggered you, you're not sitting there calmly choosing how to feel. It feels like it's already happening, like it's already in motion, like you're catching up to something that's already been set off. And that's where most people get stuck, because they've been taught to deal with the feeling instead of understanding the mechanism that created the feeling. So they spend years, sometimes decades, trying to calm something down that just keeps turning itself back on. And this is the shift. The shift is understanding. You don't calm the mind by fighting it. You take control by changing what the mind is doing. Because what you're experiencing isn't random. It's not just how you are. It's not your personality. It's not your wiring. It's a pattern. It's a cognitive pattern. Repeatable, predictable cognitive pattern. And once you see that, everything changes. And here's the part that can feel a little bit confronting, because most people believe that what they feel is being caused by what's happening around them. Something gets said, something happens, something doesn't go the way they expected. The reaction feels automatic, immediate, almost unavoidable. But that belief is exactly what keeps the pattern in place, because it creates the illusion that what's happening is outside of you, that it's being done to you. And as long as that feels true, you'll keep trying to manage the outside world, instead of gaining control of what's actually creating the experience. This is where I want you to really start to notice something. Two people can go through the exact same situation and have completely different reactions. One gets overwhelmed, the other stays steady. One spirals, the other adapts. One holds on to something for hours, days, even weeks, sometimes even years. The other lets it pass. So if the situation was the cause, they should have both responded the same way, but they don't, because the situation isn't the cause. The situation is the trigger. What happens next is generated internally by the patterns your mind has learnt to run. This is where we start to take back control, because if it's being generated, it means it can be changed. Now I want you to think about this for a moment. How often do you find yourself replaying something, a conversation, a moment, something someone said, something you wish you'd said? It doesn't just play once, it loops over and over, each time adding a little bit more intensity, a little more emotion, a little more meaning. And what started as a moment turns into a feeling that seems much bigger than the event itself. That's not the situation doing that. That's a pattern running. It's a cognitive pattern running. That's your mind trying to resolve something, trying to make sense of something, trying to predict or prepare or protect. But in doing so, it keeps the system switched on. The more it runs, the more real it feels, the more convincing it becomes, until eventually it doesn't feel like a pattern. It just feels like you. Like this is just how you react. Like this is just the way that things are. That's where people start to lose their sense of control. Because when something feels like it is you, no longer feels like something you can change. But here's the truth. You weren't born reacting this way. You learnt it. Your mind learned to run patterns. Learned them through repetition. Learned them through experience. Learned them through trying to make sense of this world that we live in. Once a pattern works or feels like it works, it gets repeated. Repeated over and over and over again. And it becomes automatic. It becomes fast. It becomes effortless. It's also invisible. Invisible is the key word, because you don't notice the pattern. You just feel the result of it. And you try to fix the feeling instead of changing the pattern that created the feeling. This is why calming down doesn't work, because you're trying to calm the output, while the system generating it is still running in the background. It's like trying to stop a wave without understanding where the tide is coming from. Instead of asking, how do I calm this down? The better question becomes, what is my mind doing right now that's creating this? As that question starts to bring awareness back to the mechanism. Once you can see the mechanism, you're no longer inside it. You're observing it. When you observe it, that's where control begins. Because you're not stuck because of your circumstances. You're stuck because of the cognitive patterns your brain is running. Once you start to see that clearly, you stop trying to fight how you feel. You start learning how to change what your mind is doing. That's where everything begins to shift. So once you begin to see that what you're experiencing is a pattern, the next question naturally becomes, how is this actually happening? Because if you don't understand the mechanics, it's very easy to fall back into the feeling that it's automatic, that it's just happening. So let's slow this down a little. Let's break it apart. This is where control really starts to come back. Every emotional reaction you have follows a process. Not a random event, but a process. It happens incredibly quickly. So quickly that most people never see it. They only feel the end result. And underneath that, there's a sequence. Something happens, that's the trigger. The trigger could be anything. Comment, a look, memory, a thought, a feeling, even something you imagined. And almost immediately your mind starts doing something with that. It starts interpreting it. It starts predicting. It starts asking, what does this mean? Is this a problem? Do I need to respond? This is where the pattern begins to run again. Because your mind doesn't just process information once. Your mind loops it, replays it, builds on it, and adds meaning to it. The more it loops, the more the intensity builds. So what might have been just a small moment starts to feel like something much bigger. Here's the important part. The intensity you feel is not coming from the original event. It's coming from the repetition. It's coming from the looping, from the way your mind keeps returning to it, each time it returns, it strengthens the emotional response. This is where a lot of people get caught, because they believe, I feel this way because of what happened. But what's actually happening is you feel this way because of what your mind is continuing to do. That's a very different thing. Because if it's what your mind is doing, that means it's not fixed. It's not permanent. It's not who you are. It's a process. Processes can be changed because processes are learned. If you can learn to do one thing, you can certainly learn to do something different. Let's go deeper again, because your mind isn't just replaying things randomly. It's trying to solve something. Your mind's trying to get certainty. It's trying to reduce ambiguity. It's trying to work things out. What does this mean for me? Am I okay? Is this safe? Do I need to act? Are those dogs down the road going to bite me? If it doesn't get a clear answer, it keeps running, keeps searching, keeps looping. The longer it loops, the more the body stays activated. The more alert you become, the more switched on you feel. This is what people often describe as anxiety or stress or overthinking. But underneath that anxiety, that stress or that overthinking, it's a system that hasn't resolved what it's looking for. So it just keeps going. Here's where it becomes even more powerful to understand this. Because while your mind is looping, it also starts to generalize. It doesn't just stay with the one event. It starts to expand that one event. This always happens. I always feel like this. Things never go right. And suddenly, what started as one moment becomes something much bigger, something that feels ongoing, something that feels like a pattern of your life. Again, it's not the situation doing that. It's not the event doing that. It's your mind building a broader pattern. Once that happens, it becomes even more convincing, because now it feels like evidence, like proof, like this is just how things are. And this is where people begin to feel stuck. Because when something feels consistent, feels permanent, but it's not permanent, it's just repeated. There's a big difference. And once you see that difference, you start to realize something very important. Your mind is not just reacting. Your mind is actively creating your experience in real time. It does that through what it focuses on, through what it repeats, through how it interprets, and through how long it actually stays with something. This is where true ownership begins. Not blame, not fault, but ownership. Because as long as it feels like this is happening to you, you'll keep trying to manage everything outside of you. Once you see that your mind is running a process, you can start to influence that process. This doesn't mean you just switch it off, because that's another trap. People try to stop thinking. People try to push thoughts away. They try to force calm. Actually, that usually just makes it stronger, because the system is still running. You're just resisting it. Control doesn't come from stopping the mind. Control comes from changing what the mind is doing. That's a very different approach. It means you don't fight the loop. You interrupt it. You redirect it. change its direction. The moment you do that, the entire experience begins to shift. Because if the intensity is being built through repetition, then changing the repetition changes the outcome. This is where we move into something very practical, very useful. Because once you understand the mechanism, you're no longer guessing. You're no longer hoping that it settles. You're no longer waiting to feel better. You're starting to see where control actually sits. Not in the outside world, not in the event or the situation, but in what your mind is doing with it. Once you can influence that, you're no longer at the mercy of reaction. You're starting to take control of the pattern. That's where real change begins. So now that you can see the pattern, now that you can understand how it's being created, the next step is where everything actually changes. Because awareness on its own isn't enough. You can understand all of this. You can recognize it while it's happening and still feel stuck inside it. So the real question becomes, how do you interrupt it? How do you take control in real time? Not later, not after it settles, but in the moment it's happening. This is where we simplify it. Because the pattern only keeps running if it keeps getting fed. Needs repetition, needs attention, needs you to keep returning to it. So the interruption doesn't come from trying to shut it down. It comes from what happens next and changing it, from breaking the continuation. The very first shift is to stop treating the feeling as something you have to follow, because you don't. Most people do this automatically. They feel something and then they go with it. They think more about it. They analyze it. They expand it. They stay inside it. That's what keeps it alive. So instead, today, you start by creating space. Pause, a gap between the trigger, a gap between what your mind does next, even if it's just a few seconds, because in that gap you're no longer reacting automatically, you're choosing. That's where control begins. What I suggest is you stop, take a breath, look up, and pause. The more you practice this, the more control continues to grow. This doesn't mean that you ignore things. It doesn't mean you pretend that it's not there. It means you recognize circumstances and events for what they are. A pattern trying to run. Instead of stepping into it, you just observe it. You notice it. You allow it to be there without adding to it. That one shift changes everything. Because the pattern expects continuation, expects you to keep feeding it. When you don't, it starts to lose momentum. And the second shift is where you redirect, because your mind doesn't stop, it moves. If you don't give it direction, it goes back to the pattern it knows. Which is why people feel like they get pulled back in. So instead, You deliberately change what your mind is doing. You deliberately shift your focus. You move your attention. You bring it into something else, something immediate, something real, something present. Because the pattern lives in replay and prediction, lives in the past, in the future. So when you bring your focus back to what's happening right now, the present, you step out of the loop. This doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as just noticing your breathing. Simple as feeling your feet on the ground. Or becoming aware of your surroundings. Not to calm yourself, but to interrupt the pattern. To change what your mind is doing. The third shift is understanding that the feeling will pass. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it. Because without repetition, it can't sustain itself. This is where people often get it wrong. They think the goal is to get rid of a feeling. It's not. The real goal is to stop generating it. Because once you stop generating it, it just naturally fades. And when you experience that, even once, you start to realize something powerful. You're not trapped in it. You're not controlled by it. You're not at the mercy of it. You've just been running a pattern. Now, you're starting to change it. The more you do this, the easier it becomes. Because just like the old pattern was learned, this becomes learned too. You begin to respond differently. You begin to recover faster. You begin to feel less pulled into the loop. Eventually, what used to take hours takes minutes. What used to take minutes takes seconds. What used to feel automatic starts to feel optional. And that's the shift. Not controlling every thought. Not eliminating every feeling. No longer being controlled by the pattern, because you're not stuck. You're not stuck because of your circumstances or events. You're not stuck because of what someone says or does. You're stuck because of the cognitive patterns your brain is running. Once you can see those patterns, once we start to interrupt those patterns, and redirect those patterns, you take your control back. Not by forcing calm, but by changing what your mind is doing. When you do that, you don't just feel different. You operate differently. You respond differently. You move through your life differently. That's where real change happens. Not in the moment you try to calm yourself. In the moment you realize that you never needed to. You just needed to take control of the pattern. That brings us to the end of today's episode. The next episode we're going to take this even further and look at how these patterns don't just affect how you feel, but how they shape your decisions, your behaviour, and ultimately the results you create in your life. So if you've ever wondered why you keep ending up in the same situations, making the same choices, or getting the same outcomes, that's exactly what we're going to unpack next. So join me then as we continue these podcasts.